Let's learn about arrays in JavaScript, and there are two ways to define an array. And the first one is to basically just define a variable like fruits, for example, and now we can create an array by using brackets. And imagine an array basically as a list of items, and inside of these lists you can save pretty much whatever you want. We could, for example, say let's have an apple inside of this list. Let's also have a banana inside of this list, and let's also have an orange inside of this list. And you separate these items by using a comma. And now let's, for example, say we want to log these fruits inside of the console, and if we run the code we can basically see this is how the array looks like inside of the console. But arrays are basically not just limited to one certain data type. We could also obviously say we want to add some strings in here, but we can also add some numbers, for example, right here. And now we could also add Boolean values if we wanted to. And this in JavaScript works perfectly fine. If you want to access a certain element inside of an array, you can again use the bracket notation. And now let's say we want to access the first element inside of our array. Now we can do so by using the 0, for example. And again, for arrays, similar to strings, counting starts from 0. So our first item is the item with the number 0. Our second item is the item with the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And now once we save this and run the file, we get apple inside of this list. So let's say we want to have our second item, which is banana. We can do so by using the index 1, and we can access banana. The second method to create an array would, for example, be let sports be equal to new array. So the new array syntax would work exactly the same. And now you use opening and closing brackets. And inside of those brackets, you can also define your items. Now we could, for example, say football, let's say soccer, and 2 items are enough for the demonstration, I'd say. So now let's just log sports inside of the console, and now we get football and soccer. So basically an array as well. And obviously we can access the items the same exact way. You can also create nested arrays. Let's say we want to have a nested array, which includes, for example, an array, and inside of this array we want to have more arrays. So let's, for example, say we have an array inside of this array, and the first array includes some numbers, for example, and let's say our second array includes some fruits, for example, and let's have a third array which includes maybe Boolean values. And now we have nested arrays. So we have arrays instead of arrays, and now we can console.log our nested array, for example, and this works perfectly fine. As you can see, if we want to access an item though, we are now going to use a 0 to access the first item inside of our array. And obviously the first item inside of our array is again another array. So we are now going to get this item because this is the first item inside of our first array. So we're going to run the code. We're going to save this, run the code, and now we get this first array as mentioned, which is just the first item inside of our first array. Let's imagine we want to get this first item inside of our nested array though. So now we first have to go to our first item inside of our first array, which is obviously this array. And now we need to access the first item inside of this array. So we can access this item by using brackets twice, basically. Now we are going to save this and run the code. And as you can see, we now get a 1. So now let's imagine we have a nested array inside of the nested array. So let's say we have arrays in here as well, 1, 2, 3. Now we have another array, 4, 5, 6, for example, and we're going to save this. So now we have a nested array inside of a nested array inside of this array. So now we can access our 4, for example, by saying, let's go to the first item inside of our first array, so 0. Let's go to the first item, or to the second item in our case, inside of our array. So we're going to use a 1. And inside of this array, we want to access the first item again. So we use a 0. We're going to save this, run the code, and now we get the 4 as mentioned. And for a lot of beginners, this might be a little bit confusing, but I just recommend you to test it a little bit and you'll definitely get the hang of it.